Rick Torres pushed his cleaning cart down the empty corridor of Research Station Kepler 7, the wheels squeaking against the polished floor. It was 2:47 a.m. according to the station's artificial day-night cycle, and the xenobiology wing was dead quiet. Just the way he liked it. Night shift janitor wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. More importantly, it paid for his daughter Lily's medical treatments back on Earth. She was living with his sister while Rick worked off-world, saving every credit he could. Leukemia treatments weren't cheap, even with insurance. So here he was, mopping floors on an alien research station while his little girl fought for her life millions of miles away. Rick dipped his mop in the bucket and continued his routine. Left to right. Overlap each stroke. Move forward. He'd done this same pattern for 3 years now. Knew every hallway, every corner, every stain that wouldn't come out no matter how hard he scrubbed. That's when he heard it. A sound. Faint. Almost like chirping? Rick stopped mid-stroke and listened. There it was again. Coming from somewhere down the hall. He abandoned his mop and followed the sound, his worn sneakers silent on the wet floor. The chirping grew louder as he approached the sealed storage room at the end of the xenobiology wing. This was one of the restricted areas. Rick had keys to most doors on the station, but he usually stayed away from the research sections. Not his business what the scientists did in there. But that sound. It reminded him of baby birds. Desperate. Scared. Rick pulled out his master keycard and hesitated. He could get fired for this. Unauthorized entry into restricted areas was a serious violation. But the chirping continued, more urgent now. Screw it, Rick muttered, swiping his card. The door hissed open. Cold air rushed out, hitting Rick like a physical force. His breath fogged in front of his face. This wasn't normal. Storage rooms were climate-controlled, kept at comfortable temperatures for the researchers. Rick stepped inside, shivering. The room was barely above freezing. Emergency lights flickered along the walls, casting everything in a dim red glow. Shelves lined the space, filled with equipment, sample containers, and monitoring devices. And in the corner, on a metal table, sat a broken incubation pod. The chirping came from inside. Rick approached slowly, his heart pounding. Through the pod's cracked transparent cover, he could see 3 small shapes huddled together. They were tiny, no bigger than his daughter's stuffed animals. And they were moving, barely. What the hell? Rick whispered. He carefully lifted the pod's cover. It came away easily, the locking mechanism completely dead. Inside were 3 of the most beautiful and heartbreaking things Rick had ever seen. Dragon hatchlings. He'd seen pictures in the station's educational materials. Celestial dragons from the Andia system, extinct for over 1,000 years until scientists started cloning them from preserved DNA. These babies were supposed to be gold, shimmering and bright. But these 3 were pale blue, almost white, their scales dull and lifeless. They were shivering violently. One of them opened its eyes and looked at Rick. The eyes were huge, taking up half its small face, and filled with something that looked painfully like hope. It chirped again, weaker this time. Oh God, Rick breathed. His eyes found the temperature display on the side of the pod. 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The readout blinked red, and below it, a message scrolled across the screen, critical system failure. Contact supervisor immediately. Rick's mind raced. He'd heard about the mess earlier that day. The head of xenobiology, Dr. Patterson, had been arrested by Galactic Authority. Something about illegal genetic trafficking, selling cloned specimens on the black market. The whole station had been in chaos, security everywhere, researchers being questioned. In all the confusion, someone forgot about these babies. Rick reached out tentatively and touched one of the hatchlings. Its skin was ice cold. All 3 of them were dying right in front of him, freezing to death because no one remembered they existed. He yanked his hand back and fumbled for his communicator. Hit the emergency channel. Static. He tried the station supervisor. Nothing. The research department. Dead air. Of course. It was the middle of the night cycle. Most departments ran skeleton crews right now, and with the investigation, everything was probably locked down. Even if he got through to someone, how long would it take them to respond? Send someone qualified? Get the proper equipment? Rick looked at the hatchlings again. They'd stopped shivering. That was worse. Much worse. When hypothermia victims stopped shivering, it meant their bodies were shutting down. Rick had learned that during wilderness training before his deployment in the service, years ago. These babies didn't have hours. They probably didn't have minutes. One of them made a sound that broke Rick's heart. Not a chirp. More like a whimper. The same sound Lily made when she was scared, when the hospital visits got too much, when the treatments made her sick. Rick made a decision without really thinking about it. Wasn't even sure it would work. But standing here doing nothing? That wasn't an option. He scooped up the first hatchling. It fit in his hands, weighing almost nothing. Its tiny body was stiff from the cold, but he could feel a faint heartbeat against his palm. "Come on, little guy," Rick said softly. "Stay with me." He unzipped his work jumpsuit and pressed the hatchling against his bare chest. His body heat, normal human body heat, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Nothing special. But maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The hatchling stirred slightly against his skin. Rick didn't waste time. He grabbed the other two and tucked them inside his jumpsuit as well, positioning all three against his chest. He zipped the suit back up carefully, making sure not to squish them. And then he stood there in that freezing room, 3 dying dragon hatchlings pressed against his heart, and prayed that being human would be enough to save them. Rick stood perfectly still in that freezing storage room, 3 dragon hatchlings pressed against his chest. For a moment, nothing happened. They just lay there, cold and motionless, and Rick felt a wave of despair wash over him. This was stupid. What did he think he was doing? He was just a janitor. These were genetically engineered alien creatures that needed specialized equipment and trained professionals. His body heat wasn't going to save them. Then the smallest one moved. It was barely perceptible at first. A slight shift. A tiny adjustment as it pressed closer to Rick's skin, seeking more warmth. Rick held his breath, afraid to disturb whatever was happening. The hatchling's breathing changed. Got stronger. More regular. "Come on," Rick whispered. "Come on, babies." The second hatchling stirred, its miniature claws extending and gripping Rick's undershirt. Not hard enough to hurt, just enough to hold on. Like Lily used to do when she was a newborn, those tiny fists clutching his finger like it was the most important thing in the world. Rick carefully zipped his jumpsuit back up, creating a warm cocoon for the 3 creatures. He could feel them moving now, all 3 of them, adjusting their positions and nestling into the heat his body provided. And then he saw it happening. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The pale blue color of their scales was changing. Warming. A hint of gold appeared at the edges, spreading slowly across their tiny bodies like sunrise breaking over a frozen landscape. "That's it," Rick murmured, one hand supporting the small bulge in his jumpsuit. "I've got you. You're okay now." His heart was pounding so hard he worried it might scare them. But they seemed to respond to it, pressing closer to the rhythm. Maybe it was comforting. A steady beat promising life and safety. Rick stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes. The hatchlings continued to warm up, their color improving from that deathly pale blue to a soft, hesitant gold. They were alive. Actually alive. Now what? Rick looked around the storage room, suddenly aware of how cold he was getting. His jumpsuit was uninsulated, designed for the station's comfortable interior temperature, not for a room that had dropped to near freezing. He needed to get these babies somewhere warm and call for proper help. Carefully, moving as smoothly as possible, Rick walked toward the door. The hatchling shifted slightly against his chest but didn't seem distressed. Good sign. He made it to the hallway and the door sealed behind him. The corridor's normal temperature felt like a furnace compared to the storage room. Rick stopped at his cleaning cart, reaching for his communicator with his free hand while keeping the other pressed protectively over the hatchlings. Maybe now he could get through to someone. Get these babies the real help they needed. Rick hit the emergency channel again. Still static. He tried the night supervisor's direct line. Nothing. The research department. The medical bay. Every channel he could think of. Nothing was working. "Damn it," Rick muttered. One of the hatchlings made a small sound. Not distressed, just a little chirp like it was responding to his voice. Rick felt his frustration melt away. These babies trusted him. They were warm and safe right now. That had to be enough. But he needed to figure out what came next. Maybe he could find an empty office, somewhere warm, and wait until morning shift when people would actually answer their communicators. The hatchling seemed stable against his chest. He could keep them warm for a few more hours, right? Rick started to carefully lower himself into one of the corridor chairs, thinking he could sit and wait. But the moment he began to lean back, changing the angle and creating the tiniest bit of space between his chest and the hatchlings, they reacted. All 3 of them started making distress sounds. Their bodies tensed. And worst of all, Rick could feel them getting colder. He looked down, pulling his jumpsuit open slightly, and saw the gold fading from their scales. The pale blue was returning. No, 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 Rick said quickly, straightening back up and pressing them close again. Almost immediately, they calmed down. The gold color returned. The distressed chirping stopped. Rick tried again, even more carefully this time. Just a slight shift in position. Same result. The instant any space opened between his body and the hatchlings, they started to die again. Okay, Rick said to the empty hallway. Okay, I understand. Guess I'm not going anywhere. He couldn't sit. Couldn't lean. Couldn't do anything that might reduce the direct contact between his body heat and these fragile lives. His back was already starting to ache from standing so rigidly, but that didn't matter. Rick looked at the clock on the corridor wall. 3:14 a.m. Morning shift started at 7 a.m. That was almost 4 hours away. He could do 4 hours. He'd done a lot worse. During his military service, he'd stood guard duty for 12 hours straight in desert heat. He'd worked double shifts when Lily's medical bills piled up. 4 hours of standing still? He could handle that. Rick started walking. Slowly, carefully, keeping his movements smooth. If he couldn't sit, he'd walk. Keep his blood flowing. Stay warm for the babies who needed him. His cleaning cart sat abandoned in the hallway, mop bucket slowly getting cold. Rick didn't care. That could wait. Everything could wait. He walked the corridors of Research Station Kepler-7, 3 dragon hatchlings hidden under his jumpsuit, pressed against his very human, very ordinary heart. Station lights hummed above him. His footsteps echoed softly on the floor. And against his chest, 3 tiny heartbeats answered his own. I've got you, Rick whispered again. I'm not letting you go. And he meant it. By the time morning shift arrived, Rick had walked 17 miles through the station corridors. His legs ached, his back screamed, and he was pretty sure he'd never felt this exhausted in his life. But the 3 hatchlings pressed against his chest were warm, golden, and very much alive. The first person to find him was Tom, another janitor starting the day shift. He rounded the corner with his cleaning cart and nearly jumped out of his skin when he saw Rick standing in the middle of the hallway like a statue. Jesus, Rick. You scared the hell out of me. Tom looked him up and down. You okay, man? You look terrible. I'm fine, Rick said, though his voice was hoarse from not talking for hours. You sick or something? Your jumpsuit looks all lumpy. Before Rick could answer, one of the hatchlings chirped. The sound was muffled by the fabric, but definitely audible. Tom's eyes went wide. What the hell was that? It's complicated, Rick said. I need you to do me a favor. Call Dr. Hayes in Xenobiology. Tell her it's an emergency about the dragon hatchlings. Tell her to come to corridor B7. Now. Tom stared at him like he'd lost his mind but pulled out his communicator. Yeah, okay. You want me to call medical too? Maybe get you checked out? Just Dr. Hayes. Please. 15 minutes later, Dr. Hayes came running down the corridor, her lab coat flying behind her. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a messy bun, glasses sliding down her nose. Rick had seen her around the station but never actually talked to her. Mr. Torres, she panted, stopping in front of him. Tom said something about the dragon hatchlings? What's going on? We've been searching everywhere for them since the investigation started. We thought they might have been stolen. Rick carefully unzipped his jumpsuit. Dr. Hayes' words died in her throat. She stared at the 3 golden hatchlings nestled against Rick's chest, very much alive and apparently content. Oh my God, she whispered. How did you, when did you, they should be dead. Found them around 3 a.m., Rick explained. In storage room 7B. The incubation pod failed. They were freezing. Dr. Hayes moved closer, her professional instincts taking over despite her shock. May I examine them? Rick nodded. But I can't put them down. Tried that. They start dying again when they're not touching me. What do you mean? Watch. Rick carefully created a small gap between his chest and one of the hatchlings. The creature immediately made a distressed sound, and its scales began losing color. Stop. Dr. Hayes said urgently. Rick pressed the hatchling back against his skin, and it calmed instantly. Dr. Hayes pulled out a handheld scanner and ran it over the hatchlings without touching them. Her frown deepened as she read the results. She scanned again. Then a third time. This is impossible, she muttered. What is? Mr. Torres, these hatchlings have imprinted on you. They think you're their parent. Rick blinked. That's not possible. I'm human. They're dragons. I know it shouldn't work. Celestial dragons are supposed to imprint on heat signatures above 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Your body temperature is barely 98 degrees. This violates everything we know about their biology. Dr. Hayes pulled out a specialized heat lamp from her equipment bag. Let me test something. She turned it on, the device glowing with intense warmth, and held it near the hatchlings. They didn't even look at it. Then Rick shifted slightly, and all three hatchlings immediately turned their heads toward him, chirping excitedly. Their tiny claws gripped his shirt tighter. See? Dr. Hayes said, her voice filled with wonder. They've bonded to you completely. Your heartbeat. Your scent. Your specific warmth. They're not looking for just any heat source. They're looking for you. Rick felt something heavy settle in his chest. What does that mean? Dr. Hayes shut off the heat lamp and met his eyes. It means they need you, Mr. Torres. Dragon hatchlings who successfully imprint won't accept anyone else. Without their bonded parent, they'll refuse to eat. They'll become despondent. Eventually, they'll die, even if all their physical needs are met. But I'm just a janitor, Rick said, panic creeping into his voice. I don't know anything about raising dragons. I don't have training or equipment or... You know how to be a father, Dr. Hayes interrupted gently. I've read your personnel file, Mr. Torres. You raised your daughter alone after your wife passed away. Lily, right? She's 11 now. Rick nodded, surprised she knew that. You've been working here for 3 years, sending most of your paycheck back to Earth for her medical treatments. Leukemia, if I remember correctly. Dr. Hayes' expression softened. That takes dedication. Love. The kind of commitment most species in this galaxy don't understand. I don't follow. Humans are unique, Mr. Torres. You're the only species we know of that practices alloparenting. Caring for young that aren't biologically yours. Adoption. Fostering. Step-parenting. Most alien species literally cannot comprehend those concepts. Their parenting instincts are purely biological. But humans? She smiled. Humans will parent anything. Your species has adopted wolf cubs, raised baby birds, bottle-fed orphan deer. You form emotional bonds that override biological programming. Rick looked down at the 3 hatchlings. One of them was sleeping, its tiny chest rising and falling against his. The other 2 gazed up at him with those huge, trusting eyes. They're babies, Rick said quietly. They needed help. Exactly. And that instinct, that immediate compassionate response to something small and helpless, is what makes you perfect for this. But what do? I have to work. I have bills to pay for Lily's treatments. Dr. Hayes pulled out her tablet. The station director is already aware of the situation. She's authorized a new position, xenobiological caretaker. It pays 3 times what you make now. You'll work with me and my team, but your primary responsibility will be raising these 3 hatchlings. You can bring your daughter here to live with you. The station has family housing, and our medical facility is excellent. Rick's mind reeled. 3 times his current salary? Lily here with him instead of millions of miles away? It sounded too good to be true. Why would they do that? Because these hatchlings represent the future of an extinct species, Dr. Hayes said. And because you've already proven you can keep them alive when our technology failed. That's invaluable. One of the hatchlings chirped and nuzzled against Rick's chest. He felt tears prickling at his eyes. After 3 years of being apart from his daughter, working jobs he hated, barely scraping by, maybe this was the break he needed. Okay, Rick said. I'll do it. Dr. Hayes smiled. Welcome to the Xenobiology department, Mr. Torres. 6 months had changed everything. Rick stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, preparing dinner while chaos erupted in the living room. The space was 3 times bigger than his old quarters, with actual windows showing the simulated sky outside. Family housing, they called it. Big enough for him, his daughter, and 3 rapidly growing dragons. Dad. Ember took my homework again. Rick sighed and wiped his hands on a towel. Ember, drop it. In the living room, 3 young dragons tumbled over each other like oversized puppies. They'd grown from kitten-sized hatchlings to creatures about as big as medium dogs. Ash was the largest, his scales deep gold with bronze undertones. Blaze was the smallest but the fastest, her scales shimmering with hints of red. And Ember, the middle child, was currently holding Lily's homework tablet in her mouth like a trophy. Ember, Rick said more firmly. The dragon's ears drooped. She gently set the tablet down on the floor and made her apologetic chirping sound. Thank you, Lily said, scooping up her tablet and checking it for tooth marks. She was 11 years old, healthier than she'd been in years thanks to the station's medical facility. Her hair had grown back after the treatments, dark and curly like her mother's had been. Rick smiled watching her. Having Lily here, actually living with him instead of being millions of miles away, was worth everything. She'd adapted to life on the station faster than he expected. Made friends at the station school. And she absolutely loved the dragons. Dinner in 10 minutes, Rick called. Go wash up. Can the dragons eat with us? As long as they use their bowls and not your plate this time. Lily giggled. Last week, Blaze had stolen an entire chicken leg right off Lily's dinner plate. Rick had been annoyed, but Lily thought it was hilarious. Life had settled into a routine that Rick never could have imagined 6 months ago. His days were split between working with Dr. Hayes' team in the xenobiology lab and caring for the dragons. But it never felt like work. The dragons needed him, and he needed them right back. Feeding time was always an adventure. The dragons ate a specialized diet of proteins, minerals, and metals. Rick prepared their meals by hand, mixing the ingredients and heating them to the right temperature. He'd learned which foods each dragon preferred. Ash liked his meals warm. Blaze preferred hers almost cold. Ember didn't care as long as Rick was the one feeding her. Playtime happened twice a day. Rick had converted one of the spare rooms into a dragon playroom, with climbing structures and heat lamps and toys. The dragons would chase each other, practice flying short distances, and generally destroy anything that wasn't bolted down. Lily helped supervise, though she was more like another playmate than an authority figure. Bedtime was Rick's favorite part of the day. All 3 dragons slept in a large heated bed in the corner of Rick's room. But every night, without fail, they'd start out there and end up either on his bed or pressed against his side. They still sought out his warmth, his heartbeat, that original connection that had saved their lives. 2 weeks ago, Blaze had gotten sick. Some kind of respiratory infection common in young dragons. She'd been listless, not eating, her scales losing their shine. The veterinary team wanted to keep her in the medical bay for observation. Blaze had other ideas. She cried constantly when separated from Rick, her condition worsening by the hour. Finally, Rick convinced them to let him take her home. He'd set up a makeshift hospital room in the apartment and stayed with Blaze for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, monitoring her temperature, administering medicine, and just being there. It reminded him of when Lily had pneumonia 3 years ago. The same helpless feeling. The same desperate need to fix things. But also the same determination. You didn't give up on family. Blaze recovered. The veterinary team was amazed, attributing it to Rick's constant care and the dragon's will to stay close to her bonded parent. Word spread fast through the station and beyond. Scientists started arriving from all over the galaxy, wanting to study Rick's methods. How was a human successfully raising dragons when the species had resisted all previous captive breeding attempts? The first research team came from the Centauri Institute of Xenobiology. 3 serious-looking aliens with more degrees than Rick could count. They set up cameras and sensors all over the apartment, documenting everything Rick did. After a week of observation, their lead researcher, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms, presented their findings to Dr. Hayes. We found nothing extraordinary, he admitted, sounding almost disappointed. Mr. Torres uses no special technology. No advanced training techniques. No pharmaceutical interventions beyond basic medical care. So what's his secret? Dr. Hayes asked. The researcher pulled up his data. He talks to them. Constantly. Narrates his actions. Asks them questions even though they cannot answer. He touches them frequently, even when not necessary. He makes sounds we believe are meant to be soothing. He responds to their emotional states rather than just their physical needs. That's called parenting, Dr. Hayes said with a slight smile. Yes, but it's inefficient. Most species feed their young and provide safety. This level of emotional engagement serves no biological purpose. Rick, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up. Maybe not for you. But it works for us. The researcher turned to him. We do not understand it, Mr. Torres. Your species' need for emotional connection is unusual. We're human, Rick said simply. We don't just keep things alive. We love them. More research teams came and went. They all reached the same conclusion. Rick's success had nothing to do with advanced science or special techniques. It was all about the relationship. The bond. The fact that he treated 3 alien creatures like they were his own children. Other species started to take notice. A Quellan scientist arrived with an injured cub that was refusing rehabilitation. Could Rick help? A Thalian brought an egg that wouldn't hatch despite perfect environmental conditions. Would Rick try? Rick helped them all. He held the Quellan cub and talked to it gently until it started eating again. He kept the Thalian egg warm against his chest for 3 days until it finally cracked open. Word spread further. Soon, Rick's apartment became an unofficial sanctuary for struggling young creatures from across the galaxy. Dr. Hayes had to step in and create actual protocols. They converted an entire section of the xenobiology wing into what they called the Multispecies Care Center. Rick trained a small team of volunteers, teaching them what he did. But he remained the primary caretaker for Ash, Ember, and Blaze. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Rick sat on the couch with Lily curled up on one side and all 3 dragons piled around them. Some documentary was playing on the screen, but nobody was really watching. "Dad," Lily said quietly. "Yeah, sweetheart. Are you happy here?" Rick looked at his daughter, healthy and smiling. Looked at the 3 dragons who'd become as much his family as Lily was. Thought about the work he did now, meaningful work that helped creatures who needed him. "Yeah," he said, pulling her closer. "I really am." Ember chirped softly and rested her head on Rick's lap. Ash and Blaze were already asleep, their breathing slow and peaceful. This was his family now. Weird, chaotic, cross-species, and absolutely perfect. And it all started because one janitor heard something crying in the dark and refused to walk away. The emergency broadcast interrupted dinner on a Tuesday evening. Rick was just serving spaghetti when every screen in the apartment lit up simultaneously. Red borders. Priority alert. The Galactic Council's official seal rotating in the center. "This is an emergency announcement to all registered xenobiology facilities," a synthesized voice declared. "The celestial dragon breeding colony on Andia Prime has suffered catastrophic environmental failure. Volcanic heat sources maintaining egg incubation have become unstable. 300 viable eggs currently in critical danger. Estimated survival time, 72 hours. Rick's fork clattered to his plate. Lily looked up at him with wide eyes. On the floor, Ash, Ember, and Blaze stopped eating, sensing the tension. Dr. Hayes called 30 seconds later. "Rick, are you watching this?" "Yeah. What can we do?" "The council is convening emergency sessions now. They're discussing options, but..." Her voice trailed off. 300 eggs, Rick. That's everything. The entire future of the species. Rick looked at his 3 dragons. They'd grown so much in the past year. Strong, healthy, happy. All because one human decided to share his body heat when technology failed. An idea formed in his mind. Crazy. Probably impossible. But maybe? "I need to make a call," Rick said. 40 minutes later, Rick was patched through to the Galactic Council's emergency session. A dozen alien species represented on the holographic conference, all arguing over solutions. Artificial incubators would take 3 weeks minimum to construct and deploy, one counselor insisted. "We could attempt planetary engineering to stabilize the volcanic systems," another suggested. "That would take months. The eggs will be dead in days." Rick cleared his throat. "Excuse me." The arguing stopped. A dozen alien faces turned toward his small hologram in the corner of their massive conference room. "Who is this?" the council leader demanded. "Rick Torres. Xenobiology specialist from Research Station Kepler-7. I'm the human raising the 3 surviving celestial dragon hatchlings." "Ah yes, the janitor," one counselor said dismissively. "This is a council-level crisis, Mr. Torres. We don't have time for..." "Bring the eggs here," Rick interrupted. "To Kepler-7. I'll save them." Silence fell over the conference. "Mr. Torres," the council leader said carefully. "We appreciate your success with 3 hatchlings. But 300 eggs? That's impossible. You cannot generate sufficient heat for that many." "You're right," Rick agreed. "I can't. Not alone." "Then what are you proposing?" "Humans don't work alone. Give me 48 hours. I'll have 300 volunteers ready. 1 egg per person. We'll keep them warm the same way I kept Ash, Ember, and Blaze alive." The council chamber erupted in protests. Absurd. Inefficient. Using biological heat from a species that barely reaches 98 degrees? The eggs require sustained temperatures above 300 degrees. "Your technology requires that," Rick said firmly. "But I'm living proof that dragon eggs will accept human body heat. My 3 dragons are alive because I shared my warmth when your machines failed. This can work. The council leader raised a hand for silence. Even if we accepted this plan, where would you find 300 volunteers willing to hold eggs for potentially weeks? Rick smiled. You'd be surprised how many humans will help when you ask. The council gave him 48 hours to prove it could work. Rick spent the next 2 days barely sleeping. He sent messages through every human network he could access. Station workers. Nearby colonies. Ships passing through the sector. The message was simple: dragon eggs are dying. We need humans willing to help save an extinct species. The response was overwhelming. Within 12 hours, Rick had 500 volunteers. Within 24 hours, that number doubled. People were coming from everywhere. Cargo haulers rerouting their ships. Families offering to help. Retired military personnel. Students. Scientists. Engineers. People from every walk of life. Tom, Rick's old janitor colleague, was one of the first to sign up. You saved 3 baby dragons with nothing but your body heat? That's the most human thing I've ever heard. Count me in. A retired Marine named Walter sent a message from 3 systems away. Held my son like that when he was born premature. Kept him warm for hours until the doctors could stabilize him. I can do it again for these dragons. A school teacher named Rachel volunteered with her entire class of adult education students. We teach human history. This is history happening. We want to be part of it. Dr. Hayes helped Rick organize everything. They converted 3 of the station's cargo bays into warming centers. Set up comfortable chairs and beds. Arranged for food deliveries. Created rotation schedules so volunteers could rest while others took over. The eggs arrived 36 hours after Rick's call to the council. Transported in refrigerated containers from Andia Prime, each egg about the size of a football, their shells a dull gray that indicated they were already dangerously cold. 300 eggs. 300 last chances for a species to survive. Rick gathered the volunteers in Cargo Bay 1. They stood in rows, ordinary humans who dropped everything to travel here and help. Some looked nervous. Others determined. All of them ready. I'm not going to lie to you, Rick said, his voice carrying through the bay. This is going to be uncomfortable. You can't put the eggs down. Can't pass them off except during scheduled rotation. The moment they lose contact with your body heat, they start dying. You'll be holding them for 8-hour shifts. Your arms will ache. Your back will hurt. You'll probably get sick of listening to me tell you what to do. A few people chuckled. But here's what you need to understand, Rick continued. These eggs contain living creatures. Dragons who never asked to be born into a dying world. They're counting on us. Not because we're special or because we have some amazing technology, but because we're human, and humans don't walk away when something needs help. He held up one of the eggs. This is what we're going to do. You'll hold the egg against your chest, just like this. Skin contact is best, so wear something you can open easily. Talk to the egg. Sounds crazy, but I think they can hear us. Let them know they're safe. That someone cares. Rick demonstrated the proper hold, the egg pressed against his heart. Your body heat might seem like nothing special. 98 degrees. But to these eggs, it's everything. It's the difference between life and death. The distribution began. Each volunteer received an egg, guidance from Dr. Hayes' team, and a comfortable station to work from. Rick moved through the cargo bay, helping people adjust their holds, answering questions, offering encouragement. Walter, the retired Marine, had tears running down his face as his egg was placed in his arms. Hey there, little one, he whispered. I've got you. Rachel held her egg like it was made of glass, terrified she'd drop it. Rick showed her how to relax, how to trust herself. A young mechanic named Danny built a special carrier so he could hold his egg while still working in the repair bay. Gotta stay busy, he explained. 8 hours is a long time to sit still. The alien observers didn't understand any of it. They watched with confusion as 300 humans stood, sat, or walked around holding eggs against their chests. No technology. No efficiency. Just people sharing warmth. Why do they volunteer for this discomfort? One alien scientist asked Dr. Hayes. Because it needs to be done, she replied. That's enough reason for humans. The first egg hatched after 3 days. The volunteer was a woman named Beth, a station administrator who'd been singing lullabies to her egg during her entire shift. The egg cracked open against her chest, and a tiny golden hatchling emerged, chirping and looking up at her with huge eyes. Beth burst into tears. Hi baby. welcome to the world. More eggs hatched over the following weeks. Each one bonding immediately to the human who'd kept it warm. The cargo bays filled with the sounds of chirping hatchlings and humans cooing over them like proud parents. Not every volunteer could keep their dragon long-term. But they'd helped give them life, and that was enough. Rick and his team arranged adoptions, matching hatchlings with people who could commit to raising them. The Galactic Council watched in stunned silence as their crisis was resolved not by technology or money, but by ordinary humans holding eggs and sharing their warmth. 3 months later, all 300 dragons had hatched. All 300 were alive and healthy. The celestial dragon species was saved from extinction. The Council held a formal ceremony, declaring humanity the galaxy's first universal caretakers. A fancy title for something humans had always done, caring for creatures that needed help. Rick stood on the ceremony stage with Lily beside him and Ash, Ember, and Blaze at his feet. Around him stood 300 other humans who'd held eggs. Behind them, 300 young dragons who existed because people cared. The council leader spoke about the significance of the achievement. Used words like unprecedented and revolutionary. But Rick wasn't really listening. He was watching Danny teaching his dragon to play fetch. Watching Beth's dragon take its first flight. Watching Walter sitting quietly with his dragon asleep in his lap. This wasn't about technology or science. It was about the simplest thing in the universe. When something is cold and alone and dying, you hold it close. You share your warmth. You don't give up. That was humanity. That was what made them special. Rick looked down at Lily, who was grinning up at him with pride. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "Yeah, sweetheart. We did." And all around them, dragons chirped and humans laughed, and somewhere in the galaxy, other species were finally beginning to understand what made humanity worth knowing. They cared. Simply, completely, impossibly. They cared. And sometimes, that was enough to save the world.